In Japan, a really personal question has exploded into this huge national debate. It's pitting tradition against modernity, the family against the individual, and it forces all of us to ask a really fundamental question about who we are.
And it all boils down to this one simple, but honestly, pretty profound question. Does a family have to share a single name? Your answer to that question puts you on one side of a really deep cultural divide.
So what's the proposed fix? Well, it's a system called optional separate surnames. The key word there is optional. This isn't about making couples keep their own names, it's just about giving them the choice to do so if they want.
And that word, choice, is absolutely crucial here, because right now, there is no choice. Japan's civil code is actually one of the very few in the entire world that legally requires a married couple to pick one surname. And that law is the battleground for this whole debate.
Okay, so that sets the stage for our first major clash. And it's a classic, right? A real philosophical showdown between the rights of the individual and the identity of the family.
So on one side, you've got this huge push for personal identity. The idea that your name is core to who you are, it's tied to your career, your whole sense of self. But the opposing view champions family unity, the belief that one shared name is the symbol of a strong, cohesive family that everyone in society can recognize.
When you look at the arguments for change, they're actually super practical. Supporters say it's all about respecting a person's right to choose. I mean, forcing a name change can seriously disrupt a career, not to mention it creates mountains of paperwork for everything, passports, bank accounts, you name it. Plus, there's international pressure. The UN has pointed to this law as a potential form of discrimination.
But of course, the folks who want to keep the system as is, they see it completely differently. For them, a shared name isn't a burden. It's the glue holding things together. It's a clear, visible sign to the entire community that this is a family. They argue it's a really important cultural tradition that provides stability, and changing it could make the very idea of family kind of fuzzy.
And this whole philosophical debate flows right into our second clash. This one is less about who am I and more about the real nuts and bolts of how society actually functions. It's the push for progress versus the need for stability.
And this is where you see two really different visions for the future. One side is pushing for a simpler, more modern society, one that's more in line with the rest of the world. The other side is worried about chaos, legal confusion, huge costs, and messing with systems that have worked for a long, long time.
So the proponents are basically saying, hey, this just makes sense for the world we live in now. It would make life way simpler, and it gets rid of a weird barrier to marriage for some couples. Plus, it acknowledges the reality that Japan, like everywhere else, has tons of dual-income households and professional women. It's really just about catching up.
But the opponents, they're hitting the brakes. They're raising some huge red flags. They point to Japan's unique family registry system, the Koseki, and ask how on earth it would handle this change. They're predicting total confusion with things like inheritance and legal contracts, not to mention the massive costs for companies and the government to update everything. They say a much better solution is just to let more people use their original surname informally at work, which is already happening anyway.
And this quote really gets to the core fear for those against the change. It's not just about administrative headaches. It's this deep concern that changing the law isn't just a small tweak. It's something that could fundamentally alter the concept of family, which they see as the very bedrock of their society.
All right, this brings us to our third and, honestly, maybe the most emotional clash of all. What does all this mean for the kids?
And the thing is, both sides genuinely believe they're arguing for what's best for children, which is what makes this part of the conversation so incredibly intense.
So you've got these two competing ideas, right? Is having parents with different last names a psychological burden on a child? Or is it just reality, a reflection of the diverse families we see today that a modern society should just get used to? So let's dig into the concerns. People against the change, they're really worried about the kids. They ask questions like, what happens when a child has to choose which parent's name to take? Could having a different last name from your mom or dad create some kind of emotional distance? In a country where almost every family shares a name, they're afraid these kids might feel like outsiders or get confused at school.
But the supporters of this change, they have a pretty powerful comeback. They argue that a child's well-being comes from love and a stable home, not from whether their parents' names match on a piece of paper. And they point out that society is already full of different kinds of families, single-parent families, international families, you name it. Other countries have figured this out with things like hyphenated names. For them, this is about building a society that just accepts families as they are, no judgment.
So, when you step back and look at these three clashes, over the individual, society, and the child, you realize they're all orbiting around one central fundamental question, a question of identity.
Yeah, when you boil it all down, this entire debate really comes down to this. What is a surname? Is it, first and foremost, about you, your individual story, your career, your identity? Or is it primarily a symbol of the family you belong to, a banner for the whole group?
So for those pushing for reform, their final word is really a call for freedom. They're saying this change is absolutely essential if we want a society that truly respects the individual and embraces diversity. The ultimate goal is a future where choosing your own name is a right everyone has.
And on the other side, the final word from those urging caution is all about stability. They believe that to protect the family unit, keep society orderly, and look out for the kids, the current system has to stay. For them, this is a massive change, and it is definitely not something to be rushed into.
And that kind of leaves us all with this huge, lingering question, one that goes way beyond Japan, really. How does any society figure out that balance between honoring its traditions and moving into the future? How do we decide when it's time for a tradition, even a really old one, to change?